Prior to industrialization, the feminine was the heart of community and played an extremely important role in hearing and honoring the emotions of the tribe. By being in touch with the emotional needs of many individuals within the community, the feminine strengthened the solidarity of the tribe. Her intuitive empathy would seek out the causes of discomfort and explore it to the point where nothing was left unsaid. A society wherein its members are heard and understood, who are allowed to be sad or angry or amorous without interpretation that there is inherent evil to what we call negative emotion, is a society where toxic shame has no ground in which to flourish, and therefore does not manifest as inadvertent cyclical abuse or neglect within families. And this is something women have always done. Healers who, by conversing about an experience not her own and being present to understand it, alleviate the unhealthiness of repression. And as we see that neurodegenerative diseases are increasing across the population, and we see how often stress and repression precedes the onset of MS or ALS, it is important to know, as fully as we can, what changes to our culture have isolated the feminine in the past few centuries. It is also vital that we see rates of increase in such diseases, eating disorders, addiction, and suicide in the female population as a means of measuring our failure as a society to provide space for healing. One major change is industrialization displacing the tribe into the nuclear family. Since women were previously community mothers, they were essential members of multiple families. And in those times, even in cultures who never communicated with each other, cultures would share the commonality of babies being held almost always for the first 2 years of life. In terms of the physiology of the brain, this is the healthiest means of secure attachment being hardwired into the developing brain. Those who have a healthy sense of connection to other humans are, of course, far less likely to be abusive or negligent and have an intuitive affinity for creating healthy relationships. So, what we have done as a society with the nuclear family was dismantle the idea that it takes a village to raise a child and sever our children from having the attention required for healthy brain development. But that's just the clinical side. What we have done to the feminine experience is not only separate them from a community of nurturing adults, we largely displaced her from a compassionate sense of purpose. What happens when a child does not have an entire community of nurturing adults? It overstresses the relationship to the child's parents, because the only avenue for love is from the parents. The daughter must find ways of earning the approval of them, as there are no alternative arms to hold her. So any disconnection will likely be interpreted as abandonment. An infant does not rationally understand that dad goes to work. An infant understands that her father abandons her from time to time. Then she takes it upon herself to find ways of improving her lovability in an attempt to cease his disconnection from her. This manifests in countless different ways, but each shares something in common, that love is finite and scarce and must be harvested through effort. So our girls find themselves environed in a culture where they must earn affection and approval and must develop ways of being noticed in a positive light, maybe through grades, maybe through talent, maybe through obedience, but surely she comes to find in adolescence that her appearance is a powerful avenue for receiving attention. And so she receives conflicting ideologies regarding whether her sexuality is allowable, whether it is to be celebrated or shamed, because the culture itself worships sexuality but praises chastity as a moral virtue. To make this confusion worse, her fear of unlovability is triggered by the fact that pretty girls receive more opportunities to be loved. Whether she herself believes herself to be pretty or not, this observation confirms the idea that love is scarce and that any beautiful woman is a threat to the possibility of receiving love. And so, a sense of urgent necessity arises to compete with other women, which, of course, forces another level of separation regarding the importance of community. To make this experience worse, our culture is one that, despite never giving a girl permission to set proper boundaries growing into adulthood, expects her to seamlessly snap into the role of strong and well-adjusted nurturing woman. The reality is, a woman cannot reach her purest potential in strength of character or most authentic giver of love and healing unless she says something along the lines of, "Fuck your approval. I'm trusting my intuition and doing this my way." It is only then that she becomes her own mother in the sense of self-approval, and is no longer acting out her life as a traumatized child who contorted her authenticity to not feel the threat of love being taken away from her. So when we see women make this shift, it is important to recognize and honor it, even when these boundaries are set in unfair ways, because this act is the graduation ceremony wherein a hurt child becomes safe in herself as a capable, loving adult. Beyond this point, after a periodic binge of repressed power, a woman can behave from sincere feminine integrity instead of survival, and will almost always choose to be a force of real healing in our culture that so desperately needs it. It is not coincidence that every culture in ancient history revered goddesses. Not coincidence that the largest source of artistic inspiration throughout all recorded culture is the female form. Not coincidence that femininity repressive religions are the most violent. And as we look at our modern climate in the US, where women get little to no maternity leave, and as an aside, the denial of maternity leave is harmful to the development of the infant's brain, and any country that refutes it operates against science and moral responsibility. And mothers must separate from their children regularly to pay for living expenses. It's not a coincidence that emotional coping mechanisms such as addictions increase. Not a coincidence that when we displace and fail to protect and nourish the feminine, that autoimmune diseases increase across the population. The feminine is vital to the physical health of the nervous system. And if we want a healthier society, we need to operate as if the neuroscience of being lovingly mothered is the most important medical research we can do as humans, because it probably is.